Okay, so everybody, welcome to the HCRA Share the Knowledge session for Tuesday night, February 21st at approximately 7:02 p.m. This is our first February meeting, and we have Bob K1YO, longtime HCRA member, that's going to do part one and part two. Part one tonight, part two next week. And I will let him explain everything that's going on, but thank you all for joining us tonight. Should be a lot of fun. And it's all yours, Bob. Do you want me to share the screen?
Yeah, could you give me the share capabilities, Larry?
You now have it, sir.
Thank you, sir. Everybody hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, tonight, the basic part one is just going to be a very, very basic, simple primer on basic tools for the new amateur operator. I thought we'd have several of them on, hopefully, and I hope you guys, because I see we have quite a crew here, don't get bored about this. But what I decided to do here, and next week will be a pretty in-depth presentation for the Nano VNA and the tiny spectrum analyzer and how we can use those as amateurs. Now that's going to be the opposite. This is a very basic one for tools for somebody just trying to start up, and what do they need to sort of work on radios and the basic stuff a ham would do with antennas. Next week's going to be in depth, and there's not going to be any introduction explanations to the Nano VNA and the tiny SA. But what I will do is provide a list of some excellent videos that everybody can take a look at that will give them a very good explanation of those two tools. Tonight, we don't need any tools. We don't need any videos. It's just me. What I wanted to do was I have a couple of years experience in amateur radio, probably 1967, I think it is. A lot of years with Hewlett Packard as a field engineer and engineering manager, and Philips Medical after that. But I've been into electronics for quite a long time. Technical specialist for the ARRL since about 2007, 2008, I think it is, and maintain a decent lab. Larry's been over and can attest to that with test equipment. And I've been, let's see, the tech director for MTARA for probably 6 or 7 years, and the tech director for HCRA and SEC for a while. And I'm just trying to settle down and into retirement now and have a saner life, if that's possible. So I'm hoping that you all can get a tip or two from what I've gone through over the years. Every time I look on the internet and find things, I find things that make my life a little bit easier, the simplest things sometimes. So this is going to be simple. And let's see if I can get the presentation up on the screen. And anybody, please pop in if you want to hear, or if you want to leave a message. I'm sure Larry or somebody could monitor the chat room, because I won't be able to do two things at once. Bad enough trying to do one these days. So, okay, so let me share the screen. And let me see where it is. Got it. Okay, can you see that partially anyway? Okay, now you can hear me. So I'm going to do a presentation here from the beginning. Hopefully it's nice and wide for you can see everything on there. So it's a decent PowerPoint, I guess. So it's Share Knowledge, basic tools. So here's some thoughts on just some basic hand type tools. And throughout the presentation, when I tripped up on something that I said, hey, I never knew that, or it may make sense to tell somebody about this because they may not know it, especially, hopefully we have some brand new hams floating in around. I see we have some guys with huge workbenches here, and people that have been long since, since the dinosaur age too, like me. So anyway, hope you don't bore you, but this is going to be basic. So here you go. Pliers. Anytime you see a star on here, okay, I'll have some comments on specific things. So the basic things that I found useful are, of course, long nose pliers down here, and especially the thin ones. My wife was a nurse for many years, so I was able to grab some hemostats. They come in very, very handy, especially at times the curved one over here, that's a curved nose on it. So that does come in handy. Of course, the lineman's pliers, I call your attention to the end of the plier here and this big piece of tape here. You certainly want to tape or cover over where it wears down, because sometimes, speaking from experience, you do come into contact with some voltage by accident when your hands slip up and touch the device itself rather than the insulation on the device. Okay. Cutters, well, you know, I found flush cut is very, very handy, especially working on circuit boards. A good Exolite cutter or a nice German cutter if you want to spend, or Swiss if you want to spend $30 or $40 per cutter is great. Cable cutter, you know, you'll see the cable cutters are much different than if I pop back here to the line cutters, because that's a straight cut in there. The cable cutters have a curved cutting edge. So if you're cutting coaxial cable, you're not going to compress it down to a 1/16 of an inch and try to uncompress it. And these little cutters here are for PVC tubing or the gray type tubing that are used, or that is used for, you know, for electrical. We use it, or I use it at least for antennas quite a bit. These things are, you know, they're extremely cheap. They're only about 10 or 12 bucks, but they make it so easy to cut through PVC or other stuff. I thought it'd be a good thing to mention. This is a Home Depot special or wherever you want them. These guys come from, probably DX Engineering. You know, they sell them as a kit and a bunch of other things. We'll talk about those. All right. And then drivers, you've probably all seen this guy here. You know, it took me about a year to realize that, oh, you know, you can change the tip, sure, but inside the end here, there's a nut driver built in. And when you flip this over, there's a smaller or larger nut driver on the other side of this diameter. So that comes in helpful if you're out there and, you know, you got a 1/4 inch or whatever, or a typical nut you may need to hold on or tighten down. And of course, some smaller, I won't say jeweler's drivers, but these are Willia, I think it is. I would suggest if anybody's going to get drivers for driving, get one with the top that rotates. I tell you this from some years as a camera repairman back in the 70s. This lets you put pressure on with your palm going downward, have your fingers drape over this and turn while you're pressing at the same time, rather than trying to grip the whole thing with your hand. They do come in very handy, all right? And of course, you can get the small kits. This guy's probably from Amazon or one of those, that you have a bunch of those crazy tips that all the Chinese units and everybody seems to be using these days. So these are probably 18 or 19 bucks. These drivers were for sale for $3 or $4. And I think a set of these good ones is probably 25 or so bucks, but they come in a whole host of cross point or flat points, okay? Strippers, well, we all have seen these guys, the Klein tool ones. Of course, coming in the kit, you have them for the coaxial cables. So frustrating that I always could never figure out how to put the cable, and I had to get the marker and put in on this side so we know which side to put it in. But these are changeable heads on that. They do come in handy for stripping cables, especially in conjunction with, you know, with doing crimp-ons. And these are, you know, these are probably 25 or 30 years old. They've been with me a long time, but they're automatic, quote unquote, strippers. You lay the wire across that in the appropriate slot. It's got slots going across here that are sort of like this, if you can see the cursor. You lay the wire in, squeeze it, it pulls it off at the appropriate position. You know, you can change the strip position, but you can still come up with them. There's fancy ones that do it electrically too, but, you know, they cost a lot of money. But again, if you can get them, if you have a lot of stripping to do, it can save you a lot of time. And of course, your crimp tools, the ubiquitous power poles made by Power Pole themselves or 15 other vendors from China and God knows where, that tolerances may be off a touch, so just be careful what you're buying. And this is probably out of West Mountain. Yeah, it's a West Mountain crimper kit. And you can change the heads in this thing. Very handy if you're doing these things for your power connections and make life a lot easier for you. And the crimp tool, this is, let's see, it's probably out of DX Engineering. And these are LMR 400 crimp plugs, which at this point, is, you know, it's getting pretty difficult, at least for me, to do soldering into connectors anymore. I always have had a good result with it usually, but as it gets colder outside, it's more difficult to try to do that unless you have some additional hardware to help you out, which I'll talk about. But these are probably the chosen thing for people these days. The people I've talked to typically all use the crimp-ons. They're very effective and pretty easy to use, and a little difficult as you get older and you can't crimp the whole thing with one hand like I used to be able to do, but such is the price of getting older. Then you got your crimp tool. And just as an aside here, this is an old Klein crimp tool I've had for about 25 years. And I got tired of crimping it with one hand. I figured, you know, I'd like to get a ratchet type tool and see if I can do it somewhere easier. So I went on Amazon or on Google, rather. Yeah, on Amazon it was actually. And I put in crimping or ratcheting crimp tool for connectors. 520 odd tools running from about $2 a piece up to $795 a piece. So I looked around, and the ones that had the ratchet in were had the results, the reviews were pretty bad on them. So I just stuck with this guy, kept this, and I'll keep it forever. No moving parts except two. And then you can get your connectors by the ton from any typical store like Home Depot or anybody, Lowe's or anybody that sells electrical terminals for the better ones, or you can get an assortment over the internet, and they do come in handy. I use, in doing a lot of field work, I've used these a lot with amateurs and in various sites for rotors and so on and so forth. So we'll pop over to some tools for soldering. Well, I've used this guy, it's ISO tip, for many, many years. It's a battery powered one. The tips are changeable. Just a little screwdriver changes the tip out. You can get a chisel type tip or a rounded type tip with a point on it. They do come in handy for some of the small circuit boards these days, in conjunction with the solder sucker we'll talk about. It does hold its charge. It's got a stand it goes into, and it's got a light on the bottom that shines down to the tip. So it makes it a little easier to see what you're doing. If you want to go with the standard stuff, we have the old Weller type 100 watt. This one is not a Weller. It's something that's got a settable tip. I can't recall the name, but it's a little fancier, but still not too expensive, 20 or 30 bucks for it. Works well. Bear in mind, you're going to need different kinds of tips. I find the chisel tip works pretty well, but if you're trying to do surface mount or some of the smaller stuff on ICs these days, you probably want to invest in a couple of different types of tips and change them out, because it's very frustrating to try to do it with a tip that is just too big to get the work done. So of course, these are AC. Those of you that are older hams probably remember these old Weller guys, 100 watt or 300 watt handguns. I remember this when I was, first starting out, and back then parts were big enough that you could see, and it was a lot easier to do the soldering with it. So they're still around. Problem with these that I've found, any of you that have them or buy a new one, is you really have to crank down on tightening these tips when you put them in, because they just don't heat up as quick as the old ones used to. They're just not made as well as the old Wellers are, for whatever reason, but what else is new? And then if you're doing any work outside on your systems, you're not going to be able to do anything with these guys typically, maybe with this guy at 300 with a long extension cord. But if you can find at any of the Home Depots or equivalent stores, you can find a butane rather, not a propane, a butane hand torch. This one's got a built-in igniter. This does make it feasible to be able to do PL259s and whatnot outside in the winter. As Larry knows, we had to solder some of his wires on his antennas, and you just were not able to get that done without using these guys. It's refillable in the bottom, of course, with any of the refills you can get for a lighter, which is handy. And they do come in handy. There is one that is much smaller than this. It looks like a, maybe about a 1-inch diameter tube cylinder, and it's got the same type of head and adjustment on it. You can adjust the heat of the flame with this, and that does come in handy, similar to this. So that's something you may want to consider. I was happy I got it. I've used it for many years and got me out of a lot of situations that probably wouldn't have otherwise. Okay, for soldering and desoldering, well, you'll probably have a host of different ones from the silver solders. I don't know if you can even still get these from Radio Shack without going on the web and trying to get them. But then, the good quality stuff, the Amtech core wire or the NTE core wire, the Kesters, it comes in handy when it has a small holder on it, and they're not too expensive. You can get it in probably 10 packs for about $2 a container there for these. And of course, those of you that have taken any test, it's 60-40 lead core solder, not the rosin core, unless you're doing plumbing work for your significant other or something. All right. So you need a good one of those. Solder wick, some people swear by it. I swear at it. I have never been able to get, for whatever reason, a good draw on solder using these braids. So basically you take the braid, put it on the connection, you put the soldering iron on top of that, and supposedly it wicks up the solder from the connection. These are pretty good name brands too. I just have not had much luck with it. So this guy here, Solder Sucker, this has been with me since I joined Hewlett Packard in 1980. Still working like a champ. I think it's German made. Jurgen will attest to the quality of some German tools, but it's still cooking like a champ out there. It does a wonderful job. If you find these, I should have put a star here, again, from painful experience, you can get these. I don't know if you can get this particular one, but a lot of them have just the flat top and they have a plunger coming out without any protection by it. I'm here to tell you, you crank that plunger down and it locks down here. And if you're not paying attention and push the button, that thing will smack you right in the face like a slap from the, from outside. So been there, done that, got the t-shirt. So just be aware, guys, that it's good to have one of these, but be careful with the other ones, okay? All right. So if you want to get a little fancier, you can get the soldering and desoldering stations. This is a pretty nice Mark Ethan, been around probably for 8 or 10 years, I think. But what you have is a soldering component of it, which your soldering iron comes out. I don't have a picture of the soldering iron itself, but the iron itself has a little nozzle on it. And this is an air intake, a suction intake. So as you're soldering, it will pull stuff off, potentially surface mount. You put the right tip on there. And then it's got, this is the whole SMD. We work basically with the, with this and this. And it's got a smoke absorber too. You set the air flow, I guess, with the gauge here with the little ball bearing in that thing, and you can crank it up and down. Smoke absorber lets you put this additional suction unit near your work, so it pulls the smoke in, and you're not breathing, the lead smoke all the time. So it comes in handy. I haven't had to use this a lot, but basically, it comes in handy when you got a lot of work to do close in work and you're just getting tired of the smoke getting in your eyes. So you can get much less expensive ones. I think they've come down quite a bit in price, but there's probably 2 or 3 brands that are high-end market brands, but they do work well. This is the suction part of the unit with the nozzle on the top that will actually pump hot air out of one side of it, so you can desolder with hot air, set the air temperature with this dial here, no, I'm sorry, with these two, and set it up to whatever degrees, so you can melt some surface mount components on this, and it has smaller diameter nozzles you can use. Again, I haven't done this a lot because I haven't done a ton of surface mount, mainly because I'm having a hard time seeing it these days, how small they are. But anyway, that's the story, okay, and I'm sticking with it. All right. Clamps and heat sinks. Well, comes in handy. I found small clamps coming quite handy to do things. These heat sinks have been around from Radio Shack a long time, and you can probably find equivalent kits of these out there. They're necessary for a lot of things that you do. I have a star on these little guys here because you can still get these. They're on the next frame. I can't recall if they're made in USA or wherever it is, but they're flat bill, I guess you could call it, alligator clips. So alligator clips without teeth. So it's an old man alligator that's just gums, okay? But great for small heat sinks, okay? They are good for making test leads. I found them very good for when I'm doing some of the nano VNA stuff and some of the spectrum analyzer stuff, that you can mount these into a fixture just by using a short piece of wire coming out of here by crimping and soldering and having these two face up. Then you can squeeze these and place your component to be under test right into there. You don't have long leads that would change your characteristics for your network analyzer or your spectrum analyzer. So you can get those. I do suggest them. They do come in handy, handier than you'd think, and they fit in small places. They're quite tiny. So, all right, let's see. Some additionally helpful stuff, especially for the aged amateur male. This, for me, absolutely necessary. Got this probably for about 15 years. There's still about 30 bucks or so. Stereo head visor. All right, and it does come with a clip-on magnifier that'll add the magnification in either side that you want to put it on. So I find this absolutely necessary. I just am having a hard time. Doing camera repair for many years has caused my eyes to have some issues with close-up work these days. So this is a great help to go on. A clamp for your bench. A lot of you guys have the vacuum vise, which I do too, but I found a couple of these on Amazon a few years ago for about $9 a piece. You know, they're not going to set the world on fire, but they do work, and they work pretty well. You can clamp them on your bench, or you can use them as a holder for if you're taking a picture, a video of your nano or something you want to make a video of, like I've been doing for the past week or so. So you can get these. There's no name on them, but they do come in handy. Just don't crank down on them too much because they're not, they're sort of a cast metal. They do crack pretty easily. I think many of you have seen this little guy here, maybe not, a metal nibbler. So any of you that are getting a, the Bud box or the Hammond type cabinets, the little cases, and make your own, what would you call it? Oh, here's one, for example. You make your own little devices. If you want to cut holes into these things, you can drill holes on the sides, and you can take a file and cut them out, or you can use the nibbler. Drill one hole, big enough for the bit to fit in, then you squeeze it. This thing pulls down, and this little piece here takes a little chip off at a time, and you can go straight up and across and back and forth. And it's pretty quick, actually. Cuts a nice hole, then you could finish it off with, with just a decent file. And I got a couple of these. I found they've come in very handy. Works with plastic too. If you got plastic you want to cut out, and want to cut your fingers like I usually do when I'm trying to do something with a knife and cut a square hole out. They do work for that also. So just bear in mind, they've been around a long time, and especially back in the early ham days when you had to punch holes out of chassis, big chassis, but still around and still working hard. Critical for any of us is static protection. You'll see a quick snap of one of my workbenches in a while, but this is to clamp onto, obviously to clamp onto a ground somewhere, a ground bus, or if you have a ground banana connector, you can plug it right into here. And it's got a 100 meg or so, I think, or maybe 1 meg, I can't recall, resistor in here somewhere, wrist strap on that. You do want to protect your static. Back in the days of HP, we had volumes of training on static protection, just because if it doesn't blow the component out, you get a little charge into it, and it may weaken the component and it'll fail prematurely. So if you're working on important stuff, or these days, small circuit boards, best to have one of these. They're not expensive. You get these. You can also get a mat that goes under them. Both of them plug into the ground, and you can make sure it's either a mat or a piece of metal. You make sure that your devices are protected. Okay. Adapters and connectors. Well, any of you guys that have been around for a while have probably had a couple. I find that I've had to do a lot of portable stuff because I was taking care of repeaters and doing work with other amateurs at their sites. So finally came up with a box that would hold a bunch of crimps up on the top, and then on the bottom, and I'll show you the bottom part, hold a good deal of my adapters. This is Velcro here because as it ages and you pick it up and it dumps, it takes you 45 minutes to put stuff back to where it belongs at the very least. All right, so I've gotten used to that, but this holds a good deal of connectors. Rubber feet, anything you want. Test loads in there if you need those, and opening it up, that's the bottom part of it. So you can see you can have the typical types of connectors or crimp-ons that you need to carry around. It's, they're not too much. These type of cases, probably can't remember the name of the groups that are making them, but there's always new ones coming out. This happens to be configurable, so you can make it bigger or smaller. You've all seen some of these cases, I'm sure. But they do a good job, and it's easy to carry a bunch of connectors around, although it does get heavy after a while. I'm here to attest to that. Usually whoever I'm working for helps carry the stuff to the site itself, which is interesting because it does get a bit heavy. So RF adapter storage is only a part of my adapters. They ain't cheap, I'm here to tell you, as you all know, but you can't be without them for sure. Now, if you really want to carry something that makes sense and you're willing to spend, these used to be about 150 bucks a couple of years back. I think they've come way down at this point in time. So it's a configurable RF adapter. What you have is you have a series of two ends, two N types, two PL259s, BNC males, and male and female of both, SMAs, and so on and so forth, all the way down the line. And what you have is, if you look at the end of these connectors that you can't see here, the back side of it, they screw into this little adapter. So you can go from a PL259 male to a BNC female or whatever you want. You can carry all these with you. And, the thing is probably 35 or so bucks now, and a lot cheaper than trying to buy good connectors, which I should talk about too. make sure you buy good connectors, or if you know what you're looking for, see if you can find some decent ones at some ham fest where you got the old the Teflon and silver ones, if you can still find them. Because some of the stuff you get from China these days, I'm telling you, you might as well use aluminum foil. I've got some horror stories about them, but I pretty much stick with these guys and stuff that's been with me for quite a few years. Okay. Multimeters. I think you all know what that is. Analog and digital, we all are familiar. I think most of us with the old Simpson 260. Comes in handy. Been around a long time. You can still get them. And then you have the digital. Okay, the Fluke 27, nice meter itself. It's got a star on it. We'll talk about that. Then Triplet does make a tiny meter for your whole around kit for about 25 or 30 bucks, which does a lot of functions. Okay, well, not as much as this guy does, but your continuity, your AC, your DC, and so on and so forth. Some of these tiny ones do capacitance and all that, although I'm not sure how good they are. We'll talk about that in the Nano VNA session next week. But that's a Triplet. Again, I get them to carry for different things. And this uses like the little, hearing aid, not hearing aid, but the little 325 type cell batteries in that. And it seems to last quite a bit. Of course, they all have batteries in them, which will die just when you go to use the thing. Okay, so if you're going to get those newbies, if any, on here, if you're going to get a digital meter, try to get one with an analog scale on it. This is where the numbers would show. Analog scales will vary according to the signal, whereas numbers is probably not going to catch up with, unless you're really good at seeing how numbers change and how they, the frequency of update is. But these bar charts here, or I guess you can call them bar graphs, do move along with it. So if you have a varying signal, you can see it right on here. And I think it's a very, very good feature to have on there. And most of the cheaper meters now do come with these, I believe, too. So good feature to have. The other thing I tell you is, if you have a meter, most of them will do ohms, obviously. Where are we here? Ohms and continuity. You can do it on ohms. If you short the lead, you get zero ohms. But I like the continuity tester. That's a little beeper or buzzer because you can hear it. Then you don't have to keep looking at the meter for something. But the Flukes, and this is probably a 25-year-old Flukes, have a hold or a max hold, or this was an expensive meter back in its day. The one thing I will tell you, if you're going to buy test leads from the internet to replace ones for these guys, Fluke has a funky type connector in here that just watch before you buy the test lead. So you get one that does fit into that. They have sort of a flange that's on the thing that protects it. And you can get the banana type to go into there. And when you get the banana type, just bear in mind to look at the test lead side of it where the prod is. So you don't get some, I have seen these, not so much lately, but I found it out many years back in a hard way. Some of the test lead plugs on the end here, and even the test leads themselves, but especially the plugs on the end, have a set screw that goes through them and connects to the metal part inside. And I'm here to tell you, if you pick up a pair of these things and go to plug them into a 300-volt power supply, you plug them in and all of a sudden you put your two hands across the power supply. So just be aware, when you're buying them, you may not find them, but you probably find the older ones. That's a danger for you, and there's still some of those around. Anyway, live and let learn. So some miscellaneous items. Some of you have had digital meter. You can go as far as you want on that. This is a Siglent, not too expensive. This is a digital multimeter, 5.5 digits, because I was doing some pretty close work, or some pretty tolerance work. This is a four lead meter, which does a little better, like we used to use in the old medical days. Okay, this guy goes to, well, I'm not sure, I think 1,000 volts. Yeah, there's 1,000 volts. And they are fused on the rear panel, although some of them are, some of these meters are fused inside, which is, mighty kind of them, because you have to take the bottom off to get at the fuses. Siglent, this is a function generator. Okay, it's arbitrary. You can set your waveforms up, but those of us that join me next week, you'll see this used in generating some test signals out there. It's got two outputs. You can do sine and a bunch of waves on that. You can do ECG waveforms and arbitrary waveforms that you draw. Pretty nice, around the same price as this. So when I was retiring, my XYL said, you're retiring, you better buy what you need right now because we're not going to have money to blow. So I did. Okay, bought some digital test equipment, nice spectrum analyzer, a couple of these two guys. But and we'll talk about this. So you need a good digital meter, you need a good function generator, probably need a good scope too. You know, you probably all have it, but you'd like to have a two channel scope, and of course an antenna analyzer, or to be superseded, I think, by the Nano VNA, we'll talk about next week. But this is the old standard, okay? The MFJ, or the equivalents you see today from the other ones that show you the SWR, and importantly, the impedance at the same time you get an SWR. So, and of course, they all appear up in here. This one goes up to UHF, and you pick your frequencies. So this, I think it's a 269, yeah, 269. There's a 269C, D, and B now. They're all around 300 bucks or so. I'm here to tell you, the Nano VNA probably cost you about 70 or so bucks, and you know, it'll do the functions this thing does. Not quite as easily as this does with punching buttons, but still can do it. Okay. So I did a lot of work over the years with what's called the service monitor that can generate signals and can look at signals at the same time with a scope, and it's got a spectrum analyzer in it. Well, it failed a couple of years back. And it took me, I know, it took me a month to go through all the layers of this thing. It's an old IFR scope, analog components, big components, and they're all cut out of cavities in different layers, 4 or 5 different aluminum layers within the cabinet itself. And the layers have layers within them. And it took me weeks to get all the screws apart so I can get them back together and finally get to the point that was smoked, and found that was a bad cap, and it wouldn't lock up and let you tune with thumb switches the frequency you want to look at or the frequency you want to receive. So that's a service monitor. So basically it's a spectrum analyzer and generator built into one. Well, about 2 months ago, it failed again. I'm here to tell you, I just don't have the time to go through that and look at it. So I'm on a crusade now to try to find something small to be able to replace the functionality of that device with a couple of the devices that are out there. So this is your tiny SA that I was talking about, your tiny spectrum analyzer, about $60. This one will go up to about 960 megahertz. Okay, the older ones are a little less. The newer ones go up to 3 to 6 gigahertz. They're about $110, $120. Excuse me. This is your Nano VNA vector network analyzer. I'm here to tell you, spectrum analyzers not too long ago, like one I have downstairs, the HP ones are about $14,000. A good VNA, a professional VNA, about 16, 18,000 and up. This guy was probably about 70 or so when I got it. This is the H4, still out there and available. And we'll talk about that somewhat in depth next week. But it looks like a lot of stuff on here, and it sort of is, but it lets you do Smith charts and SWR and a bunch of other stuff on here, and all by touch screen, basically. So this could replace, so I'll talk about that in 1 second. Of course, this is Jürgen knows this. I think he's got one too. 2-channel tiny oscilloscope from China. Goes to, they say it goes to 200, I think 120 megahertz. Well, the single channel one does. About 108 I found it'll go up to, which is pretty good for a $59 scope, or this one's $79, I think, for 2-channel. Okay, but it also has all these measurements built into it. So you can do period checks and all this. You punch the menu, you can pick a bunch of things, and it all right here, it's looking at the amplitude, the frequency, the RMS voltage of that, the peak-to-peak voltage, the period, and something else which I can't read on here. And they'll appear on here, and you can configure those and see your waveform. It does a pretty nice job. You can save the waveform, you can export it to your laptop, and it's a very clean output too. So for the price, not bad at all. Although the caveat with this, if you're using 2 channels at once, it goes down to 60 megahertz top band, okay? The highest frequency. And it does XY, which is what I wanted to use this for. You can use that to monitor the output of your transceiver for flat topping and for audio outputs. So it's very simple, and you can do that with, basically a filter. So these 3 guys here, I believe, can replace pretty much that analyzer that I had that weighed 42 pounds, I think it is, without a battery in it. These guys, I don't think, weigh 1.5 pounds altogether. I think the little case they go in weighs more. But the tiny spectrum analyzer is a very good function generator too. Very nice sine wave output. You'll see in the next share knowledge if you hit it. This guy also has a function generator built in, and a good spectrum analyzer, which I don't think I do have a picture of here, has usually a tracking generator built in, which means you can send a signal out of the system. Let's do it this way. You can send a signal out through your device under test, a coil or whatever, a toroid, bring it back in, and then you can plot, you can plot the frequency response from whatever you go from start to stop frequency, from 1 to 200 meg or whatever you want. This guy will do the same thing. It's got a very good function generator in it also, SWR meter and a couple other things. This has a function generator, and so does this. So for price of, I don't know, $200 or so, $250, you can have yourself a pretty redundant set of test equipment here. The caveat that any of you guys that have this is, if you intend to use any of these, especially these two, as an output device to go into the back of your transceiver or your receiver, I'm here to tell you, this nano VNA on the high output side, okay, might be this one, I'm not sure, but one of them will put an 8-volt roughly peak to peak signal out, okay? That's going to do your transceiver receiver right in, depending on the frequency you pick on here. We'll talk about that in next week. This guy puts at least a couple of 2-3 volts out on its output. So what you need is attenuators off this. You can get them online. You can get them probably from Amazon at, I don't have any sitting. Yeah, yes, I do. While I'm sort of talking here, I can show you the ones available on Amazon. And by the way, I don't know if you can see this guy here, but basically all of the spectrum analyzer or all the nano VNA will fit into one side of this, and all the adapters need to fit in the other side. It's a waterproof case. So this is for when I'm traveling around. All these things we're talking about here, I'm trying to fit into a very small and cheap $20 aluminum kit, but no, this is not the one I have up here. I do have one. You can get, see if I can get a close-up shot of it if it focuses on it. Attenuators like this, SMA, okay, 10 dB for probably $10 or $15. You also need, in conjunction with this, I would suggest a DC blocking capacitor, just so if any DC is coming out of the outputs of these guys, it doesn't get to your receiver or sensitive device under test, okay? Please bear that in mind. I know there's probably some people out there that want to take a look at how sensitive their new transceiver is, and they go and they plug the output of this and crank it down. Well, they may not know that there may be some DC on here, or depending upon if it re-goes to the main configuration when they start up, you may have a couple of volts coming out on here. So that's not going to do anybody any good, okay? So they shrunk, but all have multiple functions, which is a great thing. All right, there's your, up here is just basically, this thing is what, maybe 4 inches by 3 inches, 4-inch screen on the Nano these days. This is a 2.8, although there's a newer tiny SH called the Ultra. That's a 4-inch screen too, very nice. That one goes up to 6 gig. Okay, so you can get some pretty good stuff out there for a decent price, and I think could be very, very useful for you. Here's one part of the downstairs some of you may have seen. This is the workbench itself where, some physical stuff gets done. So I put this up just to show you really need, if you're going to do some work on it, to find a way to store your tools. Okay, there's the hood. There's the vacuum vise over there. We talked about that solder sucker up on the top there. There's another soldering station at the bottom. Another fluke that just sort of hangs on there, the screwdrivers. But, you need to be able to get that stuff and give yourself some room to work. Now, I suggest, the typical working height is about 28 to 30 inches for your desk. I suggest if you're going to make one of these stations, and you can do that cheaply, a workbench, find one that may be 34 inches, so whatever you can accommodate your like, because you can get a cheap bar stool like from Home Depot or from what's the other place I can't recall, West Springfield. It does stuff very cheap. You get a nice bar stool and brings you up a little higher, so you're looking down on your work. Okay, and then if you're doing this stuff, you can get this from most of the hardware stores or the box stores. I can't recall M&F or something. It's like a very thin wood type composite that can go over this, and you can sort of tack it on. And then if you scratch it up, you can change that thing. Okay, rather than just trying to put a good wood up on top. So a good lighting is always important for you. Good storage, this has been around for a while. There's an older spec analyzer. These guys are about 14 grand in their day. That's an HP. Okay, and this generator sweeps and does the same thing that I was talking about for a tracking generator. You set it to sweep, and you set this thing to read it and sort of capture the sweep and build on it, which we'll talk about next week. So that's a poor man's tracking generator. Although these days you can get a spec analyzer with a tracking generator built in for under $1,000, or probably much less now. Okay, so I'm thinking if there's anything else. Just power poles, come in handy for stuff. There's a power supply around here somewhere that runs back to the power poles. So let's see if there's anything else of interest. You can see up there is the static prevention. There's a sign right there that says "Watch the static from the stool," because depending upon the bar stool you get, there's a plastic top. You slide across it, and you put about 6 kilovolts and arc over to something. All right. So of interest here, this is a DX Engineering flag type direction finding antenna with an amplifier and attenuator built in that was bought. Ray knows this was bought for every section in Fred's area up here, Fred's district, or whatever you call it. I can never remember the term they use, division. So this was, I was making some modifications on this so you can fit it into a car without it hanging out the windows, but not bad. But you can make this little flag antenna with a resistor and a little binocular coil here, and a couple pieces of a piece of PVC and a couple pieces of dowel there, probably for about $15. This guy goes for about 115 or so, or more with this on it. Anyway, that's the workbench, just to show you for doing the actual work and measurements. There's that soldering iron up there, by the way, in this guy, and some compressed air, always handy to have, okay, if you want to blow some stuff off. And here's some solder flux remover. If you're making a solder joint, you want to make sure you get it nice and clean. And then on the other side, back here is a little bit of a machine shop, but this is what I was talking about. The oscilloscopes these days, that scope I carried with me when I was with HP in 1980. Okay, so that's seen a lot of, this is a 200 meg dual channel, seen a lot of use, but it's heavy. Okay, so there's one analog scope. There is the digital 4-channel, okay, scope there. I think it's Rigol or wherever the other one is. I can't zoom into it too easily. The spectrum analyzer sits right here. That's a Rigol, and it's got the same thing as the Nano VNA, 2 ports on it, and your device under test goes between these 2 ports. I don't know if you can see one. No, there's nothing sitting here, but you can see these BNC plug-in cables I found on the internet years ago that have come in wonderfully handy. So there's your spec analyzer. We talked about the generator and the function generator, and about the good digital voltmeter, and here's a nice power supply. There's a digital power supply there. An old HP digital power supply I got somewhere from a trash bin at HP one day. Works down to, I don't know, 0.3 of a volt. Very nice. And there's a rack mount HP analyzer I salvaged from somewhere too. So a couple of power supplies over here, but this is the component typically of your test bench. Those of you that don't have it that may want to set it up. And I had to build this for, if you want NWS, it's basically an attenuator that you can tune across, because he lives across the river from, I can't remember, there's two or three radio stations over there. He's got like an S9 plus 20 noise level. So we had to try to crank him down his Yaesu Chinese rig that had a 20 over noise level over there. So anyway, that's what the bench looks like. It happens to be a bench I picked, but another thought for you, and I don't want to talk too long, but you see these benches over here. There's a lot of other test equipment back here over the years, but these benches, you can make one bench here to hold this from one piece of 4x8 plywood, including the shelves. Okay, and you probably need another piece of 2x4 or something for these, but you can make a pretty nice bench that holds a lot. And it's let's see, I think it's a 4 foot, it's a 4 foot length, or 6 foot you can cut them to and make the shelving. But it came in handy. Okay, there's another piece in here that cuts to fit this thing. You can get this type of shelf, which I found in Staples once upon a time on sale for a couple bucks. But again, all kinds of adapters over the years. I think you guys that are doing this work a long time have come up with this collection, but you just want to let them know, let them be placed where you can find them. You know, back here, some will find handy a variac to change the voltage on your tube rigs if you want to bring the voltage up. So this has just been a collection probably of 20 plus years of gathering stuff, and Over here on this side, there's a bunch of old boat anchors that are in some states of disarray, but they take a lot of tender loving care, and some other test equipment over here. So that's pretty much it. Oh, if you want to go portable, you can find yourself a pretty nice, Jensen makes a pretty nice, although a bit pricey, little bag that you can carry around. I've been doing this one for years, and it, when I have to grab and go somewhere, there's soldering iron, the right solder, a multi-tool, a couple of good cutters in there, a couple. I didn't talk about open-end wrenches and stuff, or socket sets, but they all fit in here, and a couple other things that you may need, and they do come in handy. Some sockets or pockets on the side come in with some some Allen wrenches and all that type of stuff, and circuit tester here for the outlets. But again, I'm sure you can make up your own. I just wanted to give you an idea what I came up with over the years. It took a while. For the workbench, we're almost done now, and we're a quarter off, so we're in good shape. Workbench suggestions: be aware of your static potential damage and have grounding capabilities for that. Okay, get yourself a comfortable chair or stool, or stand if you like. Okay? It doesn't hurt to stand at all. I do that a lot. Correct work surface height, adequate AC power connections, so you're not got you don't have snakes all over the ground to trip you up if you're walking somewhere. It makes a difference as you get older because you don't react and bounce as quick. Suitable lighting to illuminate your workspace and the test equipment. And back here, by the way, you see the lights under here? There's a little, oh, okay, this one came from Amazon. It was a set of LEDs with stick-ons on the back, the LED strip, I guess you could call it, comes like in a roll, and you pull it off, you cut it, and then you just tack it on to this thing, and it's a variable, and it lights up very nicely the front of the test equipment. Otherwise, it's pretty dark underneath. So adequate lighting I talked about. And then a method for convenient storage of tools used. Obviously, the one thing that I have learned over the years, and this is a K1YOism that I found, and I tried to go for everything I can to B and C. You can go crazy trying to go with connectors. Either get yourself one of the connector kits, or just make sure that when you're doing things, a lot of your test equipment takes B and Cs. Make sure you make B and Cs or have the proper adapters for it. I found that works very well for me, and they're better for higher frequencies than a PL259s are. Okay, so I hope maybe you found something that maybe you never thought of, and that I may have tripped over the years here. But thanks everybody, and 7-3 from K1Y. I'll open up for any questions, Larry. I don't know if I have to do anything for that, but I'll stop the share now. And
all right, if anybody has any questions, you can raise your hand or raise your virtual hand, and we'll call on you. And if everybody's still awake here, it's no questions at all. My goodness.
We got too many senior folks on here. We need some novice technicians on this, But anyway, anybody that's trying to start it may have learned something. Like I say, I usually learn a tip every time I go browsing around the internet and say, hey, that's a good idea. You can incorporate that into your own shop.
Well, I know everybody's looking forward next week to learning more about the equipment end of it too.
My approach for next week is going to be, I'm not going into how do you, what's the points of the tiny SA, or what are all the, I don't think I have it up here with me. I just took it back downstairs, but how do you actually turn on and do this? But what I'm going to do is, for example, I'm going to take the Nano VNA. What do we typically use this for as hams? We use it to look at our own antennas, much better than we can with an antenna analyzer, much easier. We use it to look at SWR. We use it to check coaxial cable, lengths of cable. I won't go over that one, but we can use it to characterize toroids if you have them. We can use it to sweep toroids or to sweep a filter you've bid, which I'll do a lot of, to see if what you think you put together in reality is working for the levels. And they're very handy for that. The spectrum analyzer is great for looking at the outputs of maybe a transmitter you've got, or your Baofeng. See how bad it is on 2 meters, and they're pretty bad at times, because you can see the fundamental frequency, and you can see the third order, second, third order, fourth, fifth order harmonics, and how far down they have to be. Very handy tools, very handy as signal generators for you that you don't have to spend a fortune on. And I don't have the VNA here Maybe I do, just to see. I'm just trying to see. It's probably downstairs. I thought I brought it up. Oh, here we go. Bear with me for a second. Just some of the videos that I was working on here for the VNA and for the spectrum analyzer. Let's see. So, I mean, Fair Right is kind enough to give you a chart like this and to come up with, if you, nice, I put it right side up, to come up with, basically, if you look at a toroid, for example, you think you got a toroid, you think it's a mixed 73, they give you the range of what it should be. And you can go on using the nano VNA, you can find where the phase changes on that, and you'll see it as a spike that goes up and drops back down. You want to narrow in on that frequency, or you want to take a line and put it right through that toroid, maybe even 1 or 2 wraps, and see where it chokes down your frequency. And then you can tell with this, oh, that looks like it should be a 73. If you have what you think is a 73 type or 43, and it's choking at 1,000 megahertz, somebody sold you some stuff. So maybe a quick and easy way to check things out for you. I'm still into that. I'm here to tell you, it's been a lot of hours on the, not so bad for the tiny SA, but for the nano VNA, which again, I think the information is downstairs still at the lab.
Well, you can explain it all next week, but
Yeah,
and I
we'll
know
explain it all
Jurgen is
later.
dying to hear about Smith
Yeah.
charts.
Yeah, well, actually, nano VNA has a Smith chart on it. That's one of the things. Okay, so yeah, measure antenna system.
Oh wait, he's got a picture of something for you, Bob.
Oh yeah, that's a Smith chart. Okay, well, if you look at the nano, you got a Smith chart too. If you guys think I'm going to explain the Smith chart, you're nuts, okay? Because those people that made that were far more intelligent than I am by multi-factors. However, the nano VNA's Smith chart, which what I will show you on there, will let you look at your antenna system or your coil, your exact antenna system, which I ran off to my off-center fed dipole, and you can actually see the curve, and it doesn't have as much junk as the one Jurgen just picked up and did it. Although, if you want to work in admittance and susceptance and conductance, go right ahead. But I think as hams, all we need to know is, hey, where is this thing really resonant? Okay, and you can even check components with the nano VNA very closely. Is that capacitor that's marked as 980 picofarads truly 980? Okay, very easy to do if you're careful, although it does take some time and a couple of steps, and you do have to calibrate them when you go to use them. But I've learned a lot in the past 3 weeks, and there are some excellent videos out there. W2AEW, Alan E. Wolk, has probably 300 videos of electronics, probably the most significant and high-end guy that I've ever run into. And he used to be a field technician representative for Tektronix 30 years ago or so. The guy is incredible. His videos are excellent. There's also a guy, it's a character called the IMSAI guy, IMSAI guy, who does a lot of stuff, but is a little lower tech than Alan is. Alan's very detailed and very technical, and he's very right. He's an RF engineer. IMSAI guy is an optical engineer, but he's got a sense of humor and he explains things a little easier. And I come in like 14 layers below those guys, trying to learn from them to show you what I've learned and what we can do to apply to what we have to do with these couple tools out there.
Well, that's great. Let's do another call out. Anybody have any questions tonight before we get into more technical things next week? No questions. Okay. Thank you, Bob. Great job as always. Very interesting. And
hopefully it wasn't boring for you. I expect to have a lot of new ones on, but hey, what are you going to do? Maybe we can do it again if you get a lot of new members, Larry. And it's easy to go across the stuff. And if any of you guys have some suggestions of your own of what you found for a good tool or good modification, send it to me, k1yo@comcast.net or at awrl.net, and I'll be glad to incorporate it into something that we share knowledge with our newbies as mentors. So.
Yeah, okay. And in a couple of days, I'll be posting the Zoom link for next Tuesday's Share the Knowledge, where Bob will continue and such. And this meeting is being recorded, and it will, once it's saved on my machine, I'll be sharing it with Vanessa, who will be posting it up on the HCRA website and the HRA YouTube channel too. So if you missed it, you can always go back, or if you want to go back and review something.
Yeah,
So
if you guys have insomnia and want to fix it, you can look at that thing, and I'll take a royalty for that too, okay? Thanks, guys.
Bob,
sounds good. Everybody have a good evening, and thank you very much, Bob.
You also,
Bob, should we plan on a 2-hour section next?
no,
uh,
no,
we-
no,
uh,
no.
next
I
time?
want to keep it to just like this because I can get across it. I have it timed out. It's gonna be a lot of video and not much overhead slides, but the videos are very informative. I'm here to tell you, they, took a while, but it's like, wow, I didn't know we could do this with this. But so I just wanted to show you guys that it's easy to follow.
Well,
Okay.
these are mini meetings. They're not full-size meetings, and we want to
That's
squish it into an hour. We've had a few go beyond an hour, but the key is to keep it within an hour and just
Yeah, that's only Ray's meetings go over an hour. I know.
All right, everybody have a good week. Stay safe with whatever wacky
right.
weather we have coming this week before spring comes around again.
We'll
Have a
see you
good
later.
evening.
Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Bob.
7-3.
7-3.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Larry. Good night,
You're welcome.
everybody.
Good night, Ann. Good night, Keith. Good night, everybody.